Hey everyone! First of all, I don't know if I should say welcome back to my channel or welcome to my channel considering this is a new channel. But as you can tell from the title of this video, I will be ranking all of the books I read this year. This year I read 24 books, so in this video I'm just going to be ranking all of them. And I know what you're probably thinking, Mark, you do comedy content, what are you doing talking about books? Well, the thing is, I love to read. It is one of my favorite pastimes. It's something that I love to talk about. This video for me serves more so as a video journal of sorts. And I don't know, I just love talking about books. And one of my love languages, and this is not a love language, but to me it is, I love when I'm reading a book and I can think of someone and then tell them, oh my gosh, this book made me think of you. I think you'd really like it. So if any of you gather anything from this video, or if you see a book that you feel like resonates with you, that is a mission well done in my books. So I'm so excited to get this started. I know it's not my typical content, so if you want, grab a drink, sit back, relax, listen to this in the background, and let's get started. And I thought before we start, I would do some caveats and some things to note before we dive in. Firstly is content and trigger warnings. Me personally, I will read anything. So I highly urge you to look up content and trigger warnings for each of these books. If something I find is really crazy, then I will specify it, but otherwise I, again, will read anything. So yeah, just look those up. Secondly, I think it's important to note what my biases are when it comes to reading, which could impact the way I rate a book. So first of all, I am really big on the setting. So a setting of a book is really important to me. So if I don't like the setting, or if I feel like the author didn't tap into the setting a lot, I don't connect with it as much, I feel. And secondly, this year I recently got into the Southern Gothic subgenre. So Southern Gothic is a subgenre of Gothic literature. So Southern Gothic focuses on the grotesque. It focuses on inequalities in the US South. It's abnormal, it's creepy. Sometimes there's some paranormal activity going on. And I really enjoyed delving deep into it. I'll get into why I got into it in a little bit, but I just love it. I also wanted to go over some statistics and analytics from Goodreads about the books that I read this year. So many of them were Southern Gothic and Americana. I've read 24 books and 8,143 pages. The average book length was 339 pages, and my average star rating was 3.5 stars. I also want to outline what my reading intentions were this year. So as I said, I was really into Southern Gothic, and this was because I really started to fall in love with Ethel Cain. I think her music is brilliant, and so I started looking up what books are very Ethel Cain vibes. What is that aesthetic called, this and that, and then I figured out that it's called Southern Gothic. So I just went down the rabbit hole and read some of her favorite books, as well as just read Southern Gothic classics in general. So I really started getting infatuated with this subgenre, which I plan to continue to delve deeper in 2025. I also wanted to embrace the seasons. This is a little bit more personal for me. The past 4 years I was in college, and I feel like fall and winter and spring in particular, I was always swamped with school and exams and assignments, and I didn't have the opportunity to fully embrace the seasons. In fact, I viewed it as an obstacle, particularly winter, because I would have to walk to campus every day, and in the winter it was just dreadful. So I'm learning to enjoy the seasons again. I wanted to read some books that maybe romanticize some of the seasons a little bit more. So that was the reason I read some of these books. I also wanted to delve a little bit more deeper into classics. I feel like most of the books I've read are from the 21st century. So this year I wanted to read some books that were a little bit older. I just want to read more classics because they're classics for a reason, right? So I read a couple. I think I'd consider maybe 3 classics, which is still something. And lastly, I really wanted a variety. I'm very much a mood reader, so sometimes I'm really in the mood to pick up a romance book. Other times I'm more in a Southern Gothic mood, or I'm more in a mystery mood, or I'm more in a dystopian mood. So I really am glad that I read a variety of books, which I'm excited to share with you guys because I read quite a lot. So those are my reading intentions for this year. At the end of the video, I have my reading goals for 2025 and things that I want to focus on a little bit more when it comes to my reading. But without further ado, let's get into these rankings. So I'm going to start from worst to best, and that means we're going to be starting with the 1-star reads. Read, actually. Singular, because I only had, that was so stupid. I only had one book this year that I rated 1 star, which I think is pretty good because that means, what, 4% of the books I read this year were 1 star? That's pretty good if you ask me. I feel like last year I had 3 1 stars. So I'm pretty glad about that. So this means in 24th place, which is a book talk classic, The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I hated this book. I hated it. It was such a waste of time. So this book is about a teenage girl who gets called into her school office and is told that she got this huge inheritance from a random man. And she's summoned to the estate and she meets his grandsons. And it's basically the most linear, and that's important, the most linear plot line to figure out why she got this inheritance from this random man. So as I said, this book was too linear. There was nothing in the intro of the book. There was nothing in the start of the book that suggested any sort of answer as to why she got this inheritance. You figure out things along the way, which is something I despise so much. To the point where you get to the end and you're like, how could I have predicted this? There's no way you could have predicted this because it's so far-fetched, it's so stupid, I hate it. All of the brothers I found were too similar and I couldn't differentiate them. It just was not the vibe. This book was sold to me because they were saying it's super fast-paced, it'll get you out of a book slump. And I will say, I read this book, I think in 2 or 3 days, and I couldn't stop because I wanted to figure it out. So I guess that's kind of a positive, so I guess you can call it a 1.25 star. But otherwise, I hated this book, and I feel like hate is a very strong word, but that's what I have to reserve for this book. I'm sorry. Now we're entering 2-star territory. So this means I didn't like the book, but there was a redeeming quality. And you know what? There were only 2 2-star reads this year, which also is pretty good. Number 23 is The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore, which is also a popular book on Book Talk. This book is about a woman who inherits her aunt's pumpkin spice cafe, and she has to move to this small town where she falls in love with one of the men in town. It was sold to me as rom-com-y, cozy, which that's what it was, but it just wasn't really the vibe. This book I consider to be very gimmicky in the sense that it relies too much on Pinterest fall aesthetics, the Gilmore Girls aesthetics, which I don't watch that show, but I know what the aesthetic is. And she followed it too close to the point where the author's last name is Gilmore. I don't know if that's a pen name or that's actually her real name, but it just feels like she's trying too hard to capture that aesthetic in a book. The book honestly lacked character other than the aesthetic, which I'll give it that. It gave me a sense of coziness, but otherwise it felt like it was written in ChatGPT and the plot was outlandish. Characters moved too fast. It was a little bit melodramatic. It just was very unrealistic, and I get an idealistic read, but this was just far too unrealistic. I felt like there was no chemistry in the relationship because ChatGPT vibes. But the ambiance was cozy, so I'll give it that. That's what I mean when I say it's 2 stars. I disliked the book, but at least it provided me a sense of coziness, and it was really easy to read. Number 22, The River Runs South by Audrey Ingram. So for context, I don't know where I found this book, but I was so intrigued by it to the point where I bought the ebook for full price, which I never do. This book follows a woman who lives in Washington, D.C. I believe she's a lawyer, but her husband passes away. She is struck with grief for a year, and she has a daughter, and she just can't get out of her grief. So she decides to visit her hometown in Alabama to kind of just reconnect with her roots and her family in hopes that it'll help her. She meets down there this fisherman who she starts to fall in love with, but she finds out that the fisherman is actually facing her father in court over an eco pollution case. So there's a lot of friction between her father and this man, which I think is a pretty cool formula for a book, right? To me, this book read as very bird's eye view and Sparks Notes. I feel like it didn't go into detail where it needed to go into detail. There was that lack of Southern charm and vernacular in the book that I was hoping for in such a Southern fiction book. And I think that this was important, especially because the book had a lot of environmental advocacy in it. I feel like this was an opportunity to write with flowery prose, to have some beautiful scenery, imagery, but I feel like it was lacking that. However, I will say I feel like the grief was written very well, and I did enjoy the environmental advocacy storyline and the court case that went on. I found that to be very interesting, and it was something that I picked up from this book. So I didn't hate it, but it just was a little bit lackluster to me. Now we're moving into 3-star territory, and there are 9 3-star books I read this year, which means quite a lot of the books I read this year were okay. 3-star to me means that the books were decent or good, but they felt a little bit forgettable. The story didn't expand enough. It was just a decent time, I guess. Number 21 of my rankings is Done and Dusted by Lyla Sage. Now this one I was also recommended to on Book Talk, which I feel like a lot of these books so far have been from Book Talk. So does that say something about Book Talk? No, I just think that's my taste. But this book was so forgettable that I had to look up the synopsis. And when I read the synopsis, it still didn't jog my memory. And what I picked up from the synopsis on Goodreads was that it's a cowboy romance of sorts. I don't even remember the plot, honestly. I actually cannot tell you what went on in this book. However, the book was short and cute and gave me a sense of heart warmth, but I don't remember it. So I guess it's a 3-star because it was cute, but as I said, it's cute, but it's just not memorable. Nothing was groundbreaking, clearly, and it was just banal. And that's all I have to say about Done and Dusted by Lyla Sage. Number 20 was The Castaways by Ellen Hilderbrand. And for those of you who don't know, Ellen Hilderbrand is my favorite author. Every time she drops a book, I'm there at release date. I just love the way that she captures Nantucket, which is an island off the coast of Massachusetts. Most of her books take place in Nantucket. They're all such a fun time to read. And it breaks my heart to have to put one of her books this low on the rankings, but that doesn't mean it was bad though, okay? So Ellen Hilderbrand dropped a book this year called Swan Song, and she had posted that reading this book helps to give some additional context. You don't need to read this book, but it's helpful. And I wanted the full picture because her recent book is her last Nantucket novel. So I wanted to fully immerse myself in the book. So I read this immediately before I read Swan Song. So this book is about a couple that is facing infidelity rumors. So they go on an anniversary boat excursion, but the boat kind of capsizes and they are found. So the book follows the aftermath of that and their friend group, which consists of 6 people, so 3 other couples, and the couple's kids as they deal with the loss. So things become uncovered, things such as that. So the drama and gossip was on par with Ellen Hilderbrand's novels, which is something that I love about her books. However, there were so many characters to keep track of. I remember I had a bookmark where I had drawn out a chart of how all the characters are connected with each other, because it's more than just them as couples. So it took me about 2/3 of the book to really get a grasp on the dynamic without having to look back at the bookmark and just get confused all over again. So it was really confusing to read, and it was quite arduous to get through for something that's supposed to be a beach read and easy to read. However, I will say, which is something I've noticed in all Ellen Hilderbrand books, is that she's very emotionally intelligent, and you can tell through her writing. She's able to capture the emotions and feelings and motives for every character, no matter their age, gender, stage of life, whatever. And I think she's brilliant for it. Book number 19 was The Most Fun We Ever Had by Claire Lombardo. And y'all, this book was a saga. Okay, it doesn't look that thick, but the sheets in here are like Bible paper. You know how the Bible paper is so thin? It's like that. This book is 640 pages. It was a trek, okay? I'm getting confused. It's so hard to explain. It follows a family. There's the 2 parents. They had 4 daughters. A 5th son pops into the picture because he was the son of one of the daughters. Oh my God. Yeah. He was the son of one of the daughters that she gave up for adoption. And the story follows each of the daughters and their unique individual storylines of what they're going through in life. It takes place in the suburbs of Chicago. It's a lot going on, but also not a whole lot. Again, it spans over 600 pages. It spans 40 years of life, so there's a lot of ground to cover. Anyway, I'd consider this kind of a slice of life, even though it's over 40 years. So that means there's a lot of mundaneness and kind of just going with it's kind of just vibes sometimes, but not like, I don't know, man. I really don't know. I feel like I read this over a week, so I wasn't dreading picking it up. There was some very real characters in this book. The prose was very witty, and that's all I can really say about this. It just wasn't, again, super groundbreaking to me, but I semi-enjoyed it, I guess. I don't know. Number 18 is Let It Snow by Nancy Thayer. So as you can tell by the title and the cover, this is a Christmas novel, and I read it to get into the holiday spirit, which I feel like it kind of helped. It's very Hallmarky, it's very festive. This book follows the owner of a toy store in Nantucket, which I mentioned Nantucket before. It's that island off the coast of Massachusetts. And there's a little girl who steals from this woman's toy store. And she finds out that she is the granddaughter of her landlord, who is trying to increase her rent in the holiday season. So they're building him up to be this sort of Grinch-like character. But she kind of falls in love with the little girl's uncle, and it's kind of a love story and heartwarming story, I guess. I was really enjoying this book, but the male love interest really started to throw me off. I was very icked out by him. And the book was a little bit too idealistic for me. And I understand that this is supposed to be festive and Hallmarky and all that, but it just was way too idealistic and they're moving way too fast. And I also feel like the dialogue and the prose was a little bit too safe. It was too formal, I guess you could say. That's the word. But otherwise, it was cute. I read this up in, I think, 2 days, and it was a fun, cute holiday read. Numero 17, Wild Love by Elsie Silver. So this story is about a billionaire man who falls in love with his childhood teenage crush, but also he's dealing with the fact that his child shows up at his door because he donated to a sperm bank. I'm not whispering that because that's a bad thing. I'm just doing that for, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on here. So this child shows up at the door and he just takes her in, which was nice. It was very heartwarming to read. So those are the major kind of plot points. She also is dealing with breaking up with her boyfriend who she's not really in love with. So this book was cute and heartwarming, I guess you could say. I was influenced by Book Talk once again to read this book, and it did its job. It was cute, okay? However, I will say the male love interest, as the last book did, really irked me. He was the billionaire, and I just feel like throwing money at every problem is not super noble to me, because he basically has infinite money. So of course you're gonna throw money at stuff. So that's why I feel like a lot of the problems were solved. So that's where it irked me a little bit. Overall, it was cute. I'd recommend if you want something fluffy and heartwarming to read. Number 16 is Go as a River by Shelley Reed. So this book is about a woman from rural Colorado in the 1940s. She falls in love with a stranger who's kind of passing through town, and she ends up getting pregnant and having that child. However, the man is Native American and they killed him off, unfortunately. So she is just so appalled by the fact that they treated her man like that, the man that she loved, and so she decides that she's going to go to the wilderness and raise the child on her own. This book was giving Where the Crawdads Sing X The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. It basically follows one woman's kind of trials and tribulations as she's trying to raise this child in the wilderness and deal with the ghosts of her hometown and her family and her dad and her brother. The ending and the major plot points I found were very brilliant and well thought out and really made me go, oh my gosh. What I did like was the book was very descriptive about the setting and rural Colorado in general. However, I feel like it was under descriptive in plot points. I found the book to be a little bit redundant here and there, and to be honest, I had a little bit of trouble picking the book back up. Otherwise, I enjoyed the book. It's really highly rated. I just think it missed something for me. Number 15, Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. Do y'all remember when I was talking about Southern Gothic? This is where they begin. So this book is a Southern Gothic classic from what I hear. This was written in the 50s, and I'm gonna urge you all, if you are interested in this book, check your content warnings, check trigger warnings, all that, because it's a lot. So basically what sold me on wanting to read this book is that it is about a man who founds his own church called the Church Without Christ. So when I read that synopsis, I thought, oh my gosh, he's gonna build a cult. Not really what happened. Spoiler alert, it's a little bit more of a literary Church Without Christ that he founds in a way, but it happens too. I don't know how to describe it. So I will say it's more literary than literal, if that's a thing. This book contained a lot of those Southern Gothic elements. It was eerie, it was abnormal, it was creepy, it was jarring. The book follows this sort of grotesque cast of characters who all have different interpretations of religion, which was really fascinating to read and see how they each interpreted different things. This book is kind of rated very mixed because people argue that Flannery O'Connor's short stories are better than this overall novel of hers. So I'd really like to delve a little bit deeper into her short stories. But what I could say is that each one of the chapters in this book could serve as a short story on its own. So I did like that. It was cool. It was an interesting time, but I urge you all again to check the content warnings and the trigger warnings because it was a lot. Number 14, Swan Song by Elle Hilderbrand, which is what I was telling y'all about before. So Little Brown sent me this book, so thank you, Little Brown. I really appreciate it. I love being on Elle Hilderbrand's PR list. It's honestly the biggest honor. So I'm gonna bring up Nantucket again because this is where the book takes place. A mysterious couple enters Nantucket and all of a sudden their mansion is burning down and the chief is like, what's going on? So this book follows all of the shenanigans that were going down at this mansion, including their servant, Coco, who may or may not have been involved in this drama. And not to mention the couple that we're following is crazy, crazy, crazy rich. So you get to see all of the luxurious parties they throw, all of the crazy ways that they splurge on luxuries. So in this book, there are some returning characters throughout Hilderbrand's novels. So that includes the chief and Blonde Sharon. Blonde Sharon in her previous books kind of represents the rumor mill. She doesn't really have a storyline or plot. She's just a recurring person that represents what the Nantucket streets are saying. But in this book, we actually see her as a character and we actually get to follow along and see what her life is like. So that was something that was really cool for me to read as such a fan of Elle Hilderbrand's novels. I thought this book was good. I just found it to be a little bit I just found it to be a little bit lackluster in comparison to her other novels. But thank you again, Little Brown, for sending this over. It is so appreciated. And I'm so sad that she's not doing any more Nantucket novels. I'm devastated. Number 13 is Brutes by Dizz Tate. And this has nothing to do with the book, but I thought I would mention it. I read this book on an airplane on the way home from London, England, back to Toronto. And let me tell y'all, we took off from London at about 4 p.m. London time, and we're flying westward back to Toronto, and we landed at, I feel like 7 o'clock p.m. So we're going back in time. I was facing the sunset the entire flight. I had a window seat. Oh my gosh, you guys, it was the most beautiful thing ever because the sunset lasted the entire flight because we were going backwards. I swear, it was actually one of the most beautiful things I had ever witnessed. It was such a stunning sunset, literally over the entire Atlantic Ocean. It was so stunning. I could talk about it for hours. It was just so stunning. And I was reading this book while watching that sunset, so it was such beautiful scenery while reading this book, but I'm not gonna let that influence how I liked this book. So this takes place in middle of nowhere, swampy, small town, Florida. This is a Southern Gothic, I'd consider it to be. So it follows a group of teenage girls who become so infatuated with the town's preacher's daughter. The daughter kind of lives in the wealthy area of town, and they're kind of all spectating her and just really obsessed with who she is and what she's doing and who she's seeing. So immediately I was so swept into this novel and I was really following along, but then I started to get really lost and it became a little bit too abstract, and I'm still unclear on the ending and where we went with it. If it stayed on the course, I feel like this would have been a 5-star because y'all, this is what I mean about the setting. The setting will do it for me. The setting for this book was everything to me. I loved it so much. As I said, it takes place in Florida in the swamps, and the teenage girls, the book is kind of written from a first person plural perspective. So it's narrated by the girls as a collective, and they live in the apartment complex, which is next to, let me get this right, an abandoned construction site. And in the middle of that construction site, there is an abandoned show home, which is where a lot of the teenagers do their kind of business, because there's a mattress on the floor there, if you can pick up what I'm putting down. But that abandoned construction site is next to this swamp that no one dares to go into, and that swamp, it's next to this lake that no one dares to go into, and then on that lake there's a fertilizer factory, and then in the far background of the setting there's an amusement park, so you can hear people, screaming on the roller coaster. Really cool setting. It's very much like the Florida Project. That's what a lot of the reviews said. I never watched the Florida Project, but it's very much that type of scenery. I was so obsessed with the scenery, you guys. I just loved it. It was super hazy. It was super swampy, super Southern Gothic. I'm just gonna pull out one quote because it's a quote that really stuck with me because, as I told y'all, I really like setting. So let me read this to you. This is on page 156. Florida is ugly in February. The land cannot take an indecisive light. It needs painfully bright sunlight, a ridiculous pink sunset, or a storm showing it off. It looks terrible when the sun gets gauzy. The whole state seems to wobble with uncertainty. People drink less, and there are more car wrecks. The light fades, and the whole place just looks like something about to die. You want to put it out of its misery and let it sink. A new Florida could start over then. We could stop dumping radioactive waste in the lakes, stop building things out of styrofoam so the old ladies in retirement homes aren't blown away every hurricane. Stop with the alligators being rebranded as therapy dogs. That is just a taste of the setting, and I loved it so much. It's just so unfortunate how I didn't connect with the plot as much, but the setting was so top tier. If you want vibes with kind of crazy teenage girls, read this book. I recommend it just for vibes, honestly. Now we're entering 4-star territory. So these are books that I really enjoyed reading, and that's kind of the extent of it. So number 12 is Happy Place by Emily Henry. And I know I'm late to this because this came out in 2023, but I buy all her books in paperback because that's how they all go. I'm not a hardcover girly. I like to buy things paperback, and I want all of her books to go kind of neatly next to each other on my bookshelf. So this story is about a couple that doesn't want to tell their friends that they broke up. So they all show up to their summer getaway in Maine. So as they're together in Maine on this holiday, we know where this goes. So the setting was Maine, which was stunning and gorgeous to read. It was kind of Carly Fortune-esque in terms of the setting and the scenery. I found the chemistry to be really great. I found it to be a really good coming of age novel. I have always found Emily Henry to be very witty and her banter is really good. I actually read Book Lovers, I think 2 years ago, and I did not love it. I think I gave it a 2-star. But I gave her another chance and I actually really enjoyed Happy Place. So yeah, this was a good one. I'm really glad that I picked this one up and that I gave Emily Henry a second chance. I'm waiting for Funny Story to come out in paperback and then I'll read that. So I think I'm just a year behind perpetually with Emily Henry as long as she's, you know, dropping these hardcover novels. I did hear though that in her new novel that's coming out in 2025, she's not doing a romance, or it's not a romance the way that she's typically written. So I'm really excited about that. She said that it's like The Last Great American Dynasty, which is one of my favorite Taylor Swift songs. So very excited about that one. Okay, number 10 and number 11 I'm combining because, to be honest, I can't really differentiate them that much. But we're talking about The Score and The Mistake by Elle Kennedy. So The Mistake is the second book in the Off-Campus series and The Score is the third book in the Off-Campus series. I literally vividly remember I read this one July 1st and 2nd and this one July 3rd and 4th. I just ate them up because they're just a vibe in my opinion. As for plots, I feel like I can't even say it on the internet. So I'm just gonna tell y'all that these are very spicy. These are very spicy to the point where the plot is spicy too. But these are both hockey romances, which I didn't know that I would love. I read the first book 2 years ago. I finally continued the series this year and I just really enjoy them. These books were written in that prime time of my personal nostalgia, which was 2012 to 2015. So it just feels like such a blast from the past for me. My one critique though is that they do really blend together to the point where I had to look up the synopsis again. However, again, I do read these mostly for the vibes, the nostalgic vibes. Like it reminds me so much of Pitch Perfect. They take place on college campuses. It just reminds me so much of Pitch Perfect, the first movie where, like, that's how I envision the campus, the Pitch Perfect campus. So I just love that vibe and aesthetic so much. I found these to be really enjoyable and I picked up so many more of her books after I read these, which I actually haven't gotten to yet, which I probably should. And funny story, it was while reading those books when Elle Kennedy posted on her Instagram that she was leaving signed copies of her books at local bookstores and one happened to be so close to me. So I ran to the store and picked up signed copies of her other series. I don't know what this series is called, but oh my God, the sprayed edges crunchiness has a signature in it. And then I picked up a second one too because I was like, I'm eventually gonna read these, which I definitely will. And they're both in different color markers, which I found is pretty cool. Oh, they're actually coordinated with the spine color, which is pretty cool. I'm so excited to pick these up in hopefully the new year. So number 9 is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So I actually picked this book up whenever I was in Scotland. I went to the most beautiful bookstore ever in St. Andrews. I feel like if you're from St. Andrews, you know what bookstore it is. I forget what it's called, but so beautiful. And I think in the UK, they have a collection of classics that have this teal cover. And I just love it so much. And I want to start a collection of these types of classics. I also picked up Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, which also has the same cover and is also a classic, and I'm excited to read that next year. But anyway, the reason I picked this book up because I felt like I was given a sign, and that sign was none other than Taylor Swift. So whenever I was at the Eras Tour, November 14th, Toronto Night 1, she sang "This is why we can't have nice things," and we all know she was feeling so Gatsby for all those years. So I thought, you know what, she's telling me to read The Great Gatsby, so I think the next day I just picked this book up and I started reading it and I really liked it. Now who am I, first of all, to be critiquing a classic? I'm not anyone to be critiquing a classic. But the thing is, I really enjoy this book. I think it's a really good classic. It basically follows a man who is new money, who thinks that he can get the love of his life back through money by throwing these lavish parties and jumping from the pool from the balcony. I'm just saying Taylor Swift lines now. He was feeling Gatsby for that whole year, if I will. I actually went ahead and annotated this book quite a lot, but I enjoyed it. I liked the overall themes of this book, such as the fact that the American dream doesn't necessarily equate to happiness and that money can't buy happiness. We didn't learn this book in Canada, or at least I didn't. It's not really part of Canadian English curricula, so I felt always kind of left out by this book. I really did love a lot of the flowery writing and the prose. And yes, this is a classic, and I definitely am someone that is intimidated by classics because, you know, it's older English, they're maybe harder to understand, but I would really recommend this book to you if you're trying to get into classics because I found it to be quite accessible and quite easy to read in comparison to other classics. And if not, I suggest for classics in general, reading a chapter and then going to Sparks Notes to kind of confirm everything that you read and just to kind of maybe pick up on some analysis tips and things that maybe you weren't looking specifically for. That's what I did for this book, and it really helped me grasp this book more. And I really enjoy this book. I think it's a really good classic. And again, who am I to critique a classic? Number 8 is 1,000 Boy Kisses by Tillie Cole. This was the first book I read this year, so I started off pretty well. So this book is YA, but it says it's suggested for people age 14 and up. So this story is about 2 childhood friends, one of whom moves to Norway whenever they're kids, but then he moves back when they're in high school, and they rekindle their love for one another. The girl Poppy, though, has a terminal illness, and Rune, the male love interest, is determined to show Poppy all the love in the world as she fights her illness and eventually passes away. This book, you guys, was so gut-wrenching and heartwarming and all the things in between. I never cried in a book as much as I did with this one. I counted and I cried 7 times because it was just so devastating, but also just really beautiful too. I found the way that Rune treated Poppy was so beautiful and profound, and oh my God, I'm getting goosebumps now. It's kind of similar to The Fault in Our Stars. Very good book, but I'm gonna warn you, it is so sad. My only critique, which didn't put it in the 5-star category, is that I found it to be a little bit redundant at times. We're kind of going over the same points in the middle particularly, but overall, excellent. Okay, it's not giving me a cover, but number 7 is Pew by Catherine Lacey. This is not the cover, but this is all it's giving me. So this book is a Southern Gothic, and this book is about a genderless and raceless person who shows up in a small town in the Deep South on a church pew. The story follows the town trying to figure out what to do with this person. And it really dives deep into how we as a society are so fixated on binaries and boxes and making sure everyone fits into those boxes. The town really has no idea what to do with this person because they're so fixated on these binaries and boxes. So this is a very literary story that I really enjoyed. And the story builds up to the town's forgiveness festival, and you never know what exactly that means until you get to it. So it kind of builds this ominous and creepy and scary vibe to the novel. The writing was very vacant and cold and chilling, which I love, particularly in the Southern Gothic subgenre. I really liked this one, but again, check the trigger and content warnings for this one. At number 6, we have The Virgin Unalivings for internet's sake. The Virgin Unalivings by Jeffrey Eugenides. So I read this book after I had read Brutes, which was that story about the girls in Florida infatuated with the preacher's daughter. In the reviews of that book, they were saying that the narration style is very similar to The Virgin Unalivings in the sense that it's written from a perspective of a collective we, or people across the street, or people that are spectating someone or something. So this book allegedly is a modern classic. So there's a classic for me checked off. So this story is about a house of sisters, and the youngest sister unalives herself. The parents become so guarded and they shelter their daughters completely. They stop putting them in school. They just never let them leave and all that. However, the neighborhood boys are so infatuated by these girls, the Lisbon sisters, because they can't get a hold of them. They can't reach them. And so they kind of are following them from across the street, looking at each one of their actions, taking every single glimpse that they can see of them and running with it and making theories about them and things like that. And just trying to piece together, what is this family made of? What are they doing? What's going on here? So as I said, the story is written from a collective we perspective, so first person plural, which I found to be really interesting and is a really cool literary choice. The narrator isn't really known to the reader as it's a collective of people, and they're not the focus of the story. So there's not really a concrete answer as to what the purpose of the book is. It's really up to interpretation, as I saw from the reviews. My qualm is that this story went on so many tangents, which I get was to build the community feel. This book takes place in the suburbs of Detroit, but there was so much run on, so many tangents that I just was getting bored at times. However, the overall story was excellent. I watched the movie directly after and I loved the movie. I fell in love with it. Fell in love with Kirsten Dunst. So good. I recommend this to you, but again, content and trigger warnings because there is quite the language in this book. quite the language. And obviously, as you could probably tell from the title, now we're entering 5-star territory. These are books that I found to be incredible, so amazing, will always recommend, love them so much. They're fabulous. I love them so much. Let's get into them. Number 5 is This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune. This book was so good. And for those of you who don't know, Every Summer After by Carly Fortune is my favorite book of all time. I love it so much. So she is on the auto-buy list. In fact, I had been anticipating this release for months to the point where I went release day to an independent bookstore specifically to get a signed copy, which we have right here. And it was super full circle because I actually met her this month and I got Every Summer After signed. This is my favorite book. I got it signed with my name there. I was so gagged. So basically this book follows Lucy and she visits Prince Edward Island, which is an island in Canada, and she immediately gets off the plane and falls in love with this oyster shucker. Little does she know, the oyster shucker is her best friend's brother. And we all know how that goes. We all know how that goes, okay? There's forbidden rules. They can't be together. Friend doesn't want that, but I'm not gonna spoil the rest, okay? The imagery and the world building is so dazzling, which is very typical of Carly Fortune's books. It really immerses you into the beauty of Canada. The top quote I have from this book is "Spark, Fizz, Crackle," which I just think is a sequence of 3 words that are so beautiful, but also encapsulate the entire vibe of this book. The book flowed so well. I never got bored. I read this basically in one sitting. I started reading it and finished it in 6 or 7 hours. It was so good. And a lot of this book took place in Toronto too, which is my hometown. So it was really special to read about your hometown and be like, oh, I know where that is. I know that street. I know that building. I know that place. I know that hospital. Da, da, da. Such a cool feeling. And this is kind of a spoiler alert, so if you don't want to be spoiled, then kind of skip forward. But the ending of this book was one of the best endings I've ever read in a romance novel. I found it to be super realistic and super well thought out on both the male and female love interest part. So good. Oh, good. Take me to Prince Edward Island yesterday. Number 4 is The Women by Kristen Hanna. So good. So good. So this is a historical fiction following one woman in particular who fights in the Vietnam War as a nurse. So that kind of follows the first half of the book where she's in Vietnam serving as a nurse and she's being underestimated because she's a woman, especially by her family. And then the second half of the book is kind of her dealing with the mental struggles and PTSD and repercussions after being home from Vietnam. I find Kristen Hanna's novels to be so accessible. I find that historical fiction can be so pretentious in its writing style to the point where you're just so off-put, but all you really want to do is really delve into these books and understand the history. And she does it in such an accessible way where you understand everything crystal clear. One of her other books, The Four Winds, is one of my favorite books ever, and it was the same thing in that book. I loved it. So in this book, I learned a lot about the Vietnam War and kind of the atrocities that were going on during this war on the home front, in Vietnam, as a country, everything. So in this book, you learn a lot about the home front, the civil rights movement, social cultures between the 60s and the 80s, as well as the women's rights movement, gender roles, all that jazz. There was a great story arc seen through the main character throughout the entire novel. So excellent. I have my computer here to list some of the quotes that I really like that I included in my Goodreads review. As I wait for this to load, I'll tell you that I think this is a great book to start with if you're trying to get into historical fiction. I've only read 2 of her novels, but they were both incredible in terms of historical fiction. These are some quotes I like. Life was too short to miss out on anything because of an older generation's rules. True. Maybe that was why people built walls, to look away, to ignore anything they didn't want to see. We were the last believers, my generation. We trusted what our parents taught us about right and wrong, good and evil, the American myth of equality and justice and honor. I wonder if any generation will ever believe again. But just from those 4 quotes alone, y'all, that was some good stuff in that book. So good. Now we're entering the top 3 books that I read this year. Let's begin. Number 3 is The Moon of the Crusted Snow by Waubgeshig Rice. Y'all, this book was so incredible. This book is about an Anishinaabe community as they deal with these sudden power outages and supply shortages, and the world kind of just shuts down. And it follows this Anishinaabe community, which is in, I believe, Northern Ontario, and how the community deals with this random apocalyptic moment. This book is apocalyptic in its genre, so it's apocalyptic thriller, which is the first of its kind I've ever read, but I loved it so much. So this book was thrilling, it was educational, it was eye-opening, it was incredible, it was scary a little bit. The author writes such a slow build of panic, which really gets you nervous and gets you really on the edge of your seat, and you really want to figure out what happens. I believe that this novel is a tale as old as time. There's a lot of education in this book about Anishinaabe culture, but also about the injustices that they've faced in history and in the present. And it's all told in such an accessible manner, very much like Kristen Hanna's books are, in that they're not pretentious. They're really trying to get their point across, and it's in such an educational and accessible manner, as I said. One of the characters that shows up to the community is really, I felt, microcosmic to a lot of Indigenous injustices. I'm really excited to read the sequel, which is The Moon of the Turning Leaves. I already have it, and I just really liked it. If you want something kind of thrilling, scary, apocalyptic, while also with quite some substance about Indigenous cultures and injustices, I really suggest this book. It was incredible. Book number 2, Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. And I feel like I don't even have to go over the plot for this book, okay? Because we all know the Hunger Games series. We all know that Mockingjay is about Katniss after all the Hunger Games and her becoming the Mockingjay for Panem and District 13. You guys, I'm gonna let you in on a confession. Whenever I first read the Hunger Games series, whenever I was in middle school, this book never piqued my interest. I feel like I read the first chapter and I just wasn't into it because I don't even know why. I just wasn't into it anymore. I picked this up last month and I swear to goodness, it deserves the same praise that Hunger Games and Catching Fire have. Oh my gosh, this book is incredible. And everyone rates it slightly lower than the other Hunger Games, but this book is just as good in my opinion. It is so good. This book is digestible and fast-paced. The reader is always informed on each character's motives and what's going on politically in Panem. However, there's also so much room for analysis and trying to figure out what's going on and reading between the lines and all that. I think it is so excellent. Something I loved is looking at 2 different types of evil, both covert and overt, being Coin and Snow. And this book really made me love Haymitch a lot more. And I'm so excited for the new book because did y'all know Suzanne Collins is dropping a second prequel, Sunrise on the Reaping, March 17th. I'm counting down the days. I'm so excited. I am so excited. I can't wait. But Mockingjay deserves all the love that the Hunger Games and Catching Fires has. I love Mockingjay and I'm so mad. I'm reprimanding my former self for not digging into this and loving it because I've really been missing out. This book is incredible. And now, book number 1. My number 1 book of 2024 is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. Oh! This book is so good. So good. I actually think about this book every single day. This book is so good. And I have spent a year trying to find a book that gives me the exact same vibe as this. It is excellent. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Before I get into the plot, trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning. There's a lot of grotesque stuff going on. This was also my gateway into Southern Gothic fiction too, okay? I looked up books that are like Ethel Cain and I saw a Reddit thread about Ethel Cain's favorite book, and this is one of Ethel Cain's favorite books. So good. This book is so good. I am going to refer to the map right now. This book takes place in the Panhandle of Missouri. And you guys are probably thinking, what even goes on there? That's a major part of the book, okay? So this book is so Ethel Cain. It follows a woman who is living in Chicago and she is working for this newspaper that is kind of flopping. Her boss found this story that's going on in her hometown about missing girls. Like, it's 2 girls who've gone missing in her hometown, which is very strange because it's a very small town, again, middle of nowhere. And she's like, you know what? I'm gonna go figure this case out because that's my hometown. I know people there, whatever. Like, my family still lives there. So she goes back and she has a really fractured relationship with her mother who is really creepy and weird, but she's also spending more time with her younger sister who's also a little off. There's some things going on. So while she's down there, she's trying to figure out who is in charge of these 2 girls gone missing, what is going on, what is happening in this town, and she's reacquainting herself with her hometown, which is weird and creepy and it was all the things. It was so Ethel Cain. It was vacant, it was hollow, it was pessimistic, it was cold, it was chilling, it was creepy. The atmosphere is something that I have been craving so hard in a book, and I can't find one that replicates it. It was so perfect, and I'm so intrigued by it. I found that the main character was very morally gray, which I love reading a morally gray character. I think it's so fun. It was so good, and something that I'm kicking myself for is that I originally gave this book a 4-star, but in the review I said it was 4.5 star. But in hindsight, it's all I can think about. I think about this book all the time. And again, I've been trying to find something to replicate it for this long. So it's been bumped up to a 5-star, and it's my favorite book of the year after thinking about it all this time. And I have no regrets. And it's one of my favorite books ever. It's just so excellent. And I highly recommend it, but again, check the trigger and content warnings because it's a lot going on. It's a lot of weird stuff going on in that book, okay? A lot of weird things going on. So that was my #1 book of the year, as well as all the 24 books that I read in 2024. It was a pretty successful year for reading, I think. I think I completed my Goodreads goal, which was 24, in early December. My last book was The Moon of the Crusted Snow, which I ended the year on a really good note. It was my top 3 book of the year. So now I thought I would talk about what my reading goals are for 2025. I think I'm gonna set my Goodreads goal to 25 just to make it parallel to the year that we're in. I don't know, stupid. The first goal is to delve deeper into Southern Gothic. I have been really enjoying my journey delving into this subgenre, and I want to keep going with it. I think literally as I end this video, I'm gonna pick up The Little Friend by Donna Tartt because it is a Southern Gothic and it looks like it's gonna be pretty good, and it looks like it's right up my alley, and it looks like it's quite sharp objects like in its atmosphere. The next goal is to read more meaningfully. This means that I want to be annotating more, I want to be taking notes, I want to be writing down the quotes that I really enjoy, and really just engaging with the text in a way that is more meaningful. I want to join more book clubs, I want to join more discussions on books, all that sort of thing, to really just engage with the literature more. I feel like this year I found myself reading books just to reach my goal, and I was picking up books because I knew that they would be easy and quick to read for the sake of reaching this goal. So this year I really want to pick up books and analyze them more and look at them and take the quotes and just enjoy them more. Next, I want to read more classics and dive deeper into authors, genres, and subgenres that I really start to enjoy through those classics. There's some authors that I'm kind of interested in, such as Hemingway, Wolf, and Steinbeck. So I really want to get into their novels this year. Next, y'all know I love settings, but I really want to read a wider variety of settings. And I'm so embarrassed to say this, but every single book I read this year, all 24 of them, took place in either the US or Canada. That is such a small segment of the world, and I'm so embarrassed that none of the books I read took place elsewhere. So this year, I'm making it a priority to read more settings and read about different places, which leads to my last point, which is to read more books translated from different languages. There's so many more literary paradigms, there's so many more tropes, there's different plot patterns and things going on in different languages, and I really want to read them and enjoy them and just experience different cultures through literature. There's so much more world to uncover. And I'm gonna leave this video off with a 2025 TBR list. These are the books that I'm kind of prioritizing right now. So, as I said, The Little Friend by Donna Tartt, East of Eden by John Steinbeck, My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, One Golden Summer by Carly Fortune, Educated by Tara Westover, which is a memoir. I want to read more nonfiction. Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, Moon of the Turning Leaves by Waubgeshig Rice, Sunrise Over the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, and The Nightingale by Kristen Hannah. If you somehow stumbled across this video and you made it this far, thank you for sticking around. I really appreciate it. Feel free to let me know what your favorite books in 2024 were. I want to read all the books in the world. So let me know. Let me know if there's any that fit a similar vibe, or if you guys read any of the same books that I read this year. I just want to hear it all. Like, let's start a discussion. Let's start something fun here. Thank you so much for watching. I had so much fun doing this because I genuinely love yapping and talking about books. It's my favorite hobby, and I just want to share it with someone. So once again, thank you again so much. I wish you all an amazing 2025. And cheers to more reading. I love you guys so much. Take care.